So the typical timeline of developing a pharmaceutical, it starts by looking at several compounds in the area of discovery, medicinal chemistry, where compounds are being evaluated against a certain target via biological assays and other methods. At a certain moment when there is a real hit, when some activity is seen, when it's clear that certain compounds are binding very well on certain biological targets, then medicinal chemists start further exploring the chemical space and really trying to identify the best compound. That's also the moment in time when a patent is taken to protect the intellectual property. And as you may know, the duration of a typical patent is 20 years. After that, the patent is expiring. After a compound has been selected to move forward into development, first some tox studies are being performed. These are typical animal tox studies. When the compound is found to be safe enough to move forward in the development, phase 1 trials are being started. Phase 1 trials which are performed with healthy volunteers in general, just to make sure that indeed it's a safe compound which can be further tested in a bigger population. The phase 1 trials, typically it's a limited number of people. Phase 2 trials, depending on the type of compound, certainly involve more people, patients, and specifically are designed to look at efficacy of the compound. So is it really doing what was predicted before, and aren't there any side effects? Phase 3 trials, these are really the big trials for certain compounds where, for example, the compound is supposed to be taken the whole lifetime, for example for diabetes. This could involve up to 40, 50, 60,000 patients. They can run over several years. And that's really to make sure that the optimal dose has been selected, and that also within this very large population that no side effects are being seen. And there can be further phase 4 trials after launch as well. As you see here on the timeline, it takes about, on average, between 8 and 12 years to bring a compound to the market. If you then look also at the patent life, which is 20 years, it means that return on investment for the compound has to be realized within let's say approximately 8 years. So there are the phase up to launch is spent for develop the compounds, develop the synthesis, develop the process, and once it's launched, it goes into full commercialization or production. What does that mean in terms of how much API is needed during these different stages of development? Discovery chemists produce several milligrams, sometimes hundreds of milligrams or a few grams of compound. The early tox studies in animals and the phase 1 trials, they might need half a kilogram up to a few kilograms. But when it moves forward to phase 2 and phase 3, we already need several hundreds of kilograms, and if it are including large phase 3 trials, even several tons of active, that has to be scaled up and to be produced. The commercial needs, for sure, they really depend on the activity of the compound, on the population, target population, and that can vary a lot from, for very potent oncology compounds, for example, it could be only, let's say, a few tens of grams a year. But for other compounds with a high dose, a large population, that could mean several hundred metric tons a year. If you look at the time window that typically process chemists have to develop the process, certainly because there is a high attrition rate early in development, you cannot spend all the effort on all the compounds which are pre-phase 1. Because we know that a lot of compounds are failing, so there is a very high attrition rate. But somewhere between phase 1 and phase 3, there is about 5 to 6 years that chemists really have to fully develop the commercial process. Because at the stage of phase 3, the process has to be prepared ready to start registration batches, validation batches, transfer to production, meaning that it has to be locked quite some time before it's actually the compound will be launched. However, in certain cases there is still the opportunity to change the process post-launch, to redevelop it, and to come with what we call a second generation process. This is not always obvious to do, as the process, as it has been developed, this has been filed, and meaning that the process is really locked, so that any changes you make later, you have to resubmit a whole file, and also you have to reevaluate probably a complete new supply chain. So in general, we avoid to develop second generation processes after launch. The development cost, it's increasing when we go through the different stages of development because more and more, typically the clinical trials is the most expensive part of the whole development costs. And as we are involving more and more patients in the phase 3 trials, that's where most money is being spent. On the return, once the compound is launched, we see certainly a significant drop after the 20-year time point, because then the patent is expiring, and we know that nowadays quite fast generic companies are ready to take over the commercialization of the compound, so the revenues in general are dropping sometimes up to 70–80% within the first year after the patent is lost.